Endometriosis Awareness Week ends today, but what shouldn't end is the need to increase awareness about this condition and the constant pursuit of best practice in regular care and treatment for those affected. It's a global challenge affecting thousands of women across the world, and today we do our part by continuing to raise endometriosis awareness. Looking ahead in today's show, the causes and effects of endometriosis and more on the week. Welcome to the Daily Dose of Jamaica Magazine. I'm Theodore Henry, and I'll bring you more details after the news.
What a way you're full of our roots and culture. That was in Jamaica 60. Jamaica 60? What a piece of news, Miss Matty. I feel like my heart going bust up.
Just in, the island of Jamaica is on the verge of celebrating its 60th year of independence.
I will we have to celebrate it now. They say the people them them come here, you know. But you see when our people decide, say the other people them free paper. Oh no, them say if it's war, start it, whatever. We all collect medal panta for it, you know.
Medal.
Amount of tongue we give them,
The celebrations are slated to begin on January 1st, 2022. Organized by the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport. We have more in this report.
I am on site and planning activities are ablaze. Persons are advised to download the Reggae Jamaica app to know what it pre.
Why pre?
Activities for the Jamaica 60 celebration.
Yeah, I don't know the app to get the updates then.
Good day, I'm Stephen McHugh, and this is your JIS News for Wednesday, March 9. For the fifth consecutive financial year, the government will not impose any new taxes. That was among the highlights of Finance Minister Dr. Nigel Clarke's presentation as he opened the 2022-23 budget debate in Parliament Tuesday. Minister Clarke says the state will establish a special $2 billion fund to ease the impact of rising fuel prices on the vulnerable. The measure will support persons who are unable to pay the high gas and energy prices.
We will come back on the details in terms of allocation because we want to discuss with stakeholders, get other people's views of how we should allocate it. But I can easily see, some of it being used to provide some relief to taxi operators who have fixed fares, and some being used for children on path who have transportation costs and so forth.
Meanwhile, provisions are being made to incentivize the purchase of electric vehicles. Minister Clarke says import duty has been reduced from 30% to 10% for an initial 5-year period. Annual registration fees have also been exempted on battery-operated electric vehicles.
Last year, the government earned only $27 million in duties on it from the importation of electric cars. This measure has a cost of $18 million, therefore, on current volumes. However, because duties on motor vehicles are so large and a huge part of government revenues, we will need to limit the number of electric vehicles being imported that benefit from this duty to in the first instance, 1,000 per annum. And we'll come with more details on how this will work.
This will be implemented in the first quarter of the upcoming fiscal year. In the meantime, support for the most vulnerable will be prioritized through a $200 million allocation to families who are not on the PATH program. Finance Minister Dr. Nigel Clarke told Tuesday's Parliament that qualified families would receive a one-off grant of $10,000 to assist with food expenses. Over the next 3 weeks, the Ministry of Labour and Social Security will partner with organizations such as the Jamaica Red Cross to identify persons in need.
This, Madam Speaker, is immediate. It is right now.
Come April, government will distribute $250 million worth of care packages to the most vulnerable. The funds will be disbursed by members of Parliament and municipal corporations.
We have made provisions to be in a position to follow up with another $250 million later in the year, depending on how the situation evolves.
In other news, the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries will be seeking to expand the mother farm concept across the island to boost domestic crop production. Portfolio Minister Pernell Charles Jr. gave the commitment during a recent tour of Dencon Foods Jamaica Limited in Clarendon.
This type of operation represents exactly what Jamaica needs to move towards self-sufficiency, sustainable development, and to really achieve our local production.
The concept boasts first-class drying rooms and cold storage facilities, which Minister Charles Jr. says allows greater efficiency to meet local and export demand while reducing wastage.
So we want in 10 years to have a number of these operations so that our discussion then is more focused on how we are exporting to other countries around the world.
He says the ministry will be working with Dencon Foods and small farmers to share the best practices that will allow for maximum crop yield. And finally, government is working to increase the take-up of funds offered under the Development Bank of Jamaica's program for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, MSMEs. This drive will be bolstered by a $24.5 million allocation for the MSME sector. Minister without portfolio Robert Montague told a recent meeting of Parliament's Standing Finance Committee that the DBJ has introduced a digital system to speed up the time between application and disbursement of funds.
A lot of the small and micro enterprises are not properly registered under the Companies Act. The Companies Office has gone out and have undertaken these programs to register them, so that some of the funds require you to be registered. And we are going to intensify that. Some persons do not have a TRN, and the tax administration in Jamaica will intensify, so that we want to encourage persons to be regularized so they can access these funds. We are not here to build roadblocks, but there are certain criteria for the funds, and we want to pass the information so people can make use of the funds.
And that's it for JIS News Today. I'm Stephen McHugh. Thanks for watching.
Up next, we look at how the Ministry of Finance will be spending its budgetary allocation for the 2022-2023 financial year.
Government's management of Jamaica's national affairs in the 2022-2023 fiscal year will be financed by a budget of $912 billion. It comprises $539.5 billion for non-debt or recurring expenses, $65.1 billion in capital spending, and $307.5 billion for debt servicing.
The government's efforts to enhance the pace of recovery in fiscal year 2022-23 will be effected through utilization of normal revenue flows to target growth-enhancing activities.
The Ministry of Finance and the Public Service receives a sizable increase to its operating expenses. Under recurrent spending, $20.9 million of the $22.6 billion contingency provision has been reserved to meet the cost of anticipated adjustments in public sector wages, stemming from the compensation review process. The Finance Ministry also increased funding for its scholarship program by $11.5 million. $21 million has been allocated to plan, design, and develop a proposal for a national policy and plan of action on international migration and development. Work will increase under Vision 2030, the country's national development plan project, with $73 million, an increase of $20.5 million.
With the economic recovery underway, we're seeking to boost capital investment in fiscal year 22-23 by 20%.
The ministry's $9 billion capital budget is funded by the government and the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. $290.5 million will be spent on initiatives to strengthen the business environment for private sector investment. Similar interventions will be pursued under the Jamaica Business Environment Reforms Project managed by JAMPRO. And $5.3 billion is budgeted through the contingency provision for projects that are approved for implementation under the public investment system.
And we do this in order to ensure that the growth momentum is maintained.
On the matter of building resilience against climate change, a combined $439.5 million has been set aside for special projects. Disaster risk reduction training and capacity building will be done at the community level for persons in the agriculture sector and living in coastal areas. A Jamaican Path from Hills to Ocean project, which started last November, will complete several environmental assessments, studies, and designs. Government will complete 10 climate-smart interventions for the Ministry of Health and Wellness, develop early warning messages for 6 vulnerable groups, and train officers in specific agencies to use radar data and products. The government has set several targets for the Public Sector Transformation and Implementation Project for the 2022-23 financial year. Among them are to establish a location for the MyHR Plus and Shared Services teams and launch the pilot of the HR Shared Services and Internal Audit. Continuing simultaneously alongside these are key components of the Strategic Public Sector Transformation Project. These are aimed at strengthening public resource management to facilitate a more enabling environment for growth within the private sector.
We can't stop fight. Antibiotics, take them right. Antibiotics, antibiotics. Come let me tell you how to take them right. Only take them from professionals with medical credentials. Do not share them with friends or relations. Use prescriptions, follow instructions. Take them till them done with no interruptions. Bad bacteria we can't stop fight. Antibiotics, take them right.
Brought to you by the UWI Mona, Ministry of Health, National Health Fund, PAHO WHO.
Women have their own battles to come face to face with, and one just happens to be endometriosis. For some, the tissue that normally lines the inside of your uterus grows outside the area and is often quite painful. This is when they collide with the condition. Of course, the symptoms may vary, but the impact is nothing to sneeze at. Here's more on the condition that has some people suffering silently.
I was always so miserable during my period, for as long as I can remember. The pain was so severe. I remember not having an appetite, nauseous. It was difficult to stand. It felt like a monthly interruption of my life. It continued for years, an endless cycle of suffering. I had no idea what was wrong with me. Then I was diagnosed with endometriosis.
Endometriosis is a chronic, painful condition of women in their reproductive years. So the condition occurs when the tissue that is normally inside the womb, called the endometrium, gets on the outside. This organ here is the uterus, or the womb, and within it is the endometrium. This is the tissue that is normally shed each month when you have a menstrual flow or a period. And it behaves normally when it flows and you have a period. However, if this tissue flows backwards through the fallopian tube, the structure here, it can land on the ovary, this white structure here, and form endometriotic cysts called endometriomas. It can run down the back of the womb and form deposits here, which can cause pain. The most common symptoms are very painful periods. You may also have infertility and pain during intercourse. Now, if the endometriotic deposits end up in other places, for example, endometriosis has been found in almost every tissue in the body. So it can be in the eye, so rarely. You may have intermittent blindness. It can be in the lung, so you can have shortness of breath, symptoms of a collapsed lung. In the brain, you can have seizures. To diagnose endometriosis, we start with the history of the painful periods. For those patients, we'll ideally do an abdominal and a pelvic examination. The gold standard test is a surgical procedure called laparoscopy. That's where we use a camera, which is inserted in through just below the belly button or the umbilicus, and using powerful lighting sources and optics, we're able to look and examine the pelvis, and then we can see the endometriotic deposits.
My journey with endometriosis began about 7 to 8 years ago when I was trying to get pregnant and couldn't figure out why. Went to the doctor, and after doing several tests, he asked about endometriosis. I'd never heard of it. And he said, well, we do a non-invasive surgery, which is a laparoscopic. They go in through the navel.
By this, we use a camera, as I said, and we use a set of surgical instruments which allow us to enter the abdomen through very small incisions, and we're able to locate the deposits, and we try to excise them or remove them from the pelvis in its entirety.
So I did the surgery, and unfortunately I had what was called a spontaneous abortion. That didn't hold. Tried again a few months later, and I got pregnant. I went to about 5 months, and unfortunately the baby died in vitro. I have not been able to ever get pregnant again.
After making a diagnosis, the mainstay of treatment is going to be dependent on your stage of the disease. So there are medical treatments, so we can use painkillers, oral contraceptive pills, surgical techniques. If you are having debilitating pain, if you're missing school, if you're missing work, then that's not normal and you need to seek the appropriate help. There are specialists who are well trained, both in terms of picking up the symptoms and making the diagnosis and in terms of treatment. And the earlier you're treated, the better the outcome is likely to be.
I think every woman should get checked because we've grown up to hear that once you have a bad period, it's a norm. Unfortunately for those of us who have it, it's not the norm. I started following Shauna Fuller's story and finding out how she found out that she had it. And I offered my services. I said, I want to spread the word. I volunteered. They have a support group. I went there and met with others. And I also got involved in the march. If you find out you have it, join the Base Foundation. Be a support for somebody. There's nothing better than just that encouraging word. And just know that there's somebody out there who understands.
I can only encourage our women, if any of these symptoms seem to be occurring to you, seek appropriate help through your local obstetrician gynecologist and be referred to a specialist.
If I knew then what I know now, that it had a name, that I wasn't alone, now that you know, don't suffer in silence. Endometriosis affects 1 in every 10 woman and girl worldwide. In Jamaica, over 10,000 women are affected by the disease. Many are not aware that they have it.
Other medical conditions are leaving global footprints and increasing the need for new and innovative medical care and treatment. We now explore one of the rarest forms of cancer by breaking down its causes, symptoms, and treatment options.
According to the World Health Organization's World Health Ranking, someone in Jamaica is more likely to lose their life from prostate cancer, lung cancer, breast cancer, stomach, cervical, liver, uterine, and even ovary cancer before they'll ever go from bladder cancer. Now, the rarity of this illness drafted local statistics at 0.34% of the total number of deaths in the island in 2018. That's only 62 people. But of course, that's 62 people too many, and maybe, just possibly, 62,000 people not having ever heard of this disease until now.
So the bladder is a small muscular organ that is in the pelvis, deep down in the pelvis. Its purpose is really to store urine. Now, cancer, as has been said before, it refers to the unregulated abnormal growth of cells, and in this case it would be the bladder. So bladder cancer is unregulated growth, usually from the lining of the bladder, that is abnormal cell growth. So the signs and symptoms of bladder cancer, usually the commonest sign is usually hematuria. Now what hematuria is blood in the urine. So usually it's painless hematuria, maybe painful hematuria, which is pain along with blood in the urine. Also, there may be irritative bladder symptoms, or as we would say, storage, lower urinary tract symptoms. Some of these include urgency, frequency, going to the bathroom frequently, waking up often at nights, it's known as nocturia, and in general, some dysuria, which is like burning when you pass your urine.
Now, before you experience any of those symptoms, there are some causative factors that lead to bladder cancer that you may want to assess first. It simply means that while it happens, it's usually preventable.
The commonest causative factor for bladder cancer is cigarette smoking. It's actually associated with about 50 to 60% of bladder cancers. There are other risk factors which are known as occupational hazards. So individuals who work in the industries and have prolonged exposure to aromatic amines, aromatic hydrocarbons. So in the textile industry, painters, those who work with tar, amongst other occupational hazards, are at risk for bladder cancer. Patients who also have, for whatever reason, they'll have chronic irritation to the bladder. So there's a parasitic infestation known as schistosomiasis that's rarely associated with bladder cancer. Also, patients who have chronic catheters, indwelling catheters, as well as bladder stones and a few other things that cause chronic irritation to the bladder.
Now, bladder cancer is very picky when it comes down to gender, with the likelihood of displaying its sprouting behavior on men more often than women. And while the data shows that you don't necessarily need to be thinking about this until you're well over your 40s, there is proof that it affects many of us who are nowhere near to collecting our pension. Wow.
The older you become is the more at risk you are. Usually not before the age of 40 that bladder cancer is seen. It's more common in the 5th to 6th decades of life. 5th, 6th, 7th decades of life. It's actually more common in men than women, and this is thought to be associated with lifestyle amongst other things. Bladder cancer is very treatable. In fact, most bladder cancers present as organ-confined disease, meaning that they're absolutely curable. The treatment options include definitely surgery. This involves what is known as a transurethral resection of the bladder to actually get diagnosis, and in some cases is curative if the tumor is completely gotten. This involves passing instruments through the urethra, which is the opening through which you pass urine from the bladder, and that allows us to see the tumor. It allows us to resect or scrape the tumor away from the bladder wall, and in some cases we may or may not give intravesical immunotherapy or chemotherapy depending on the risk of the disease. But that's usually how bladder cancer is initially treated.
So now may be a good time to just pause for a bit and think about the causes, signs, and symptoms of bladder cancer. And if you've been treated from it before, remember to get your regular checkups, because bladder cancer has a high recurrence rate. Watching from the sidelines or the confines of a bed can be a bit of a sting for some, piercing for others. So let's go stronger and healthier together by prioritizing our health.
We are in a race against time, to reverse the effects of climate change by one simple action which has positive and enduring effects. That's right, plant a tree Leave a lasting legacy. Join the My Tree Legacy promotion by planting a tree at your alma mater and share your work with us. Submit videos and pictures of you, your family, your friends, and colleagues planting trees. Every tree counts. Plant a tree today and keep climate change away.
Endometriosis Awareness Week was created to inform more people about this condition. It is often a hidden and sometimes unrecognized condition until a woman decides to get a proper medical checkup. But beyond the awareness, the week was created to, firstly, promote a better understanding of endometriosis as a real, weakening and disabling disease. Secondly, highlight the consequences for those living with it and affected by the disease. Thirdly, seek the best practices and consistent care and treatment for everyone across the world, despite their social status. And fourth on our list, provide an opportunity for those whose lives have been affected by endometriosis to play an active part in helping to make a difference. Even if you're not directly affected by endometriosis, you can help to raise awareness. Join the conversation on social media to increase the volume and noise around this condition. Let's all come together and help to make our country more endometriosis literate, but also help to make it the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business.
Getting the first dose is not an excuse not to wear the mask, not to social distance or physical distance, not to sanitize. Getting the first dose is not justification for deciding that you're going to resume the parties, the gatherings beyond the limits that have been established. The journey is to observe the protocols, take the second dose when it is time, and then we will resume some semblance of normalcy once we achieve herd immunity.
We're almost at the end. Thanks for staying with us for this Jamaica Magazine journey. A refresher of this, yesterday's, and other shows can be had through the JIS YouTube channel. Also, visit our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages for more information. From all of us here at the JIS, I'm Theodore Henry. See you soon. Do take care.
This has been a production of the Jamaica Information Service, the voice of Jamaica.